Hey, real quick before we get into this one, Top Choice Gaming and the People's Card Shop are doing an OP09 case tournament online on December 28th. I'm going to be doing the commentary for it, and I should have the breakdown afterwards as well. So, really looking forward to it. If you guys haven't checked it out already, make sure to do so. Link in the description and enjoy the video. Hey everyone, Eggman here with another video, and we've got another week of the OP09 power rankings for the English version of the One Piece card game, and I'm really excited to go over this data. We've been in a little bit of a drought due to the holidays and the fact that we've only had one event officially for the OP09 meta, and because of that, I've been looking forward to more data and just kind of seeing what this kind of meta in general shapes up to be as well. This is the exact same like cardless meta as there was in the OP9 Japan version of it, but I've already been seeing some differences, and I think that's really cool and interesting to kind of go over as well. So if you guys want to check this out, you can check out all the data on my website, Eggman Events, which is linked in the description. You can find all of the weeks that we've been covering here as well. You can also find out the Booster Box Online Treasure Cup that I made a video on earlier this week as well. You can find all the deck lists and the data for that one as well. And then lastly, shouts to TCG Matchmaking for getting all this data, for all that they do, all the support they give, and I really do appreciate it. You can check out their Patreon too if you guys want to support them, and they're just an invaluable resource for me. There's just so much data that they collect that I wouldn't be able to get otherwise, and I really do appreciate all of their hard work. But jumping on into it, we do have the power rankings for this week, and if you compare it to the last week power rankings, there is not a lot of difference from the top five, right? They're still the same leaders in the same order. There's been a little bit of a shift of the bottom five though, depending on what leaders are kind of viable. And I think the biggest thing that we've noticed, and this was from the event too, Teach is not doing super well over here in the West, right? We have a 46.4% win rate. It doesn't do super well in events. It did not get a top 32 finish on this previous one, and it's difficult to tell if that's because it's a deck that needs a lot of practice to know how you do well with it, or if it's something that we are playing too aggressive with Doflamingo and other bad matchups for Teach, where it's not going to really get a foothold into this meta. So I thought that's really interesting as well. All of the leaders in the top four, though, were able to do well. My pet deck, my favorite deck in the meta right now is the red and purple Luffy, and it's doing well on the rank ladder, but it's not doing well in tournaments yet. And it's curious to see if it's something that if just people not testing as much with it or not as confident with it too. I also will say that there's slightly less matches this week, and I'm going to blame the holidays for that too, for that difference in match quality, or in quantity rather. So I think that's something that affects these power rankings just because less people are testing with it. I would expect that for the next week, there's probably going to be a little bit of an explosion. I know a lot of people are going to be testing with Card Fest in mind, but that's something as well. So, but we do see that Black and Yellow Luffy is going to be is viable on this one. It was able to get some tops in the Booster Box event as well. Nami moved up a couple spots, and then we have Betty and Bonnie at the bottom, which it's interesting to see Bonnie at 10th place since it did get second place for the event, though not a lot of people are on it. And you can see like just some triple digit numbers for both Nami, Betty, as well as for Bonnie. So because of that, I think there's less people who are on it, but there are a lot of people who do believe in the decks and are very strong with it. But I do think that's an interesting kind of tidbit for it too. And then obviously same thing with BY Luffy. I think this is probably still the hardest deck to play in this meta, and it's something that you have to actually have some kind of tricky matchups, I think, more consistently, and you have to kind of change up your deck building too. But I think this is pretty fair for what it is. I definitely think like these top three decks are 100% the top three. Maybe Luffy gets in there, definitely top five, and then if it's my own personal list, I think Red Purple Luffy gets there, even though I think less people are on it specifically too. So we also do have the matchup charts too, and I think something that just kind of cements Doflamingo's kind of dominance right now is just look at its matchup spread, right? Its worst matchup right now is a Nell, which is not going to be super popular. Otherwise, everything else like Lucci, BY, and Bonnie, these are all like 50-50 matchups, more or less, right? These are all matchups that you can win in a lot of ways, and then you can kind of upscale on some of the other ones, right? Like Teach being good, is strong since it is such a high percentage for us. Purple Luffy is also, I think, a very popular deck right now. The mirror match obviously is 50-50, and then Shanks is something that's really winnable, which I think is a very present deck in this meta too. Shanks is kind of like the same thing, but my only issue with it is that there's no like super good matchups with it, right? Outside of like the blue and purple Luffy, the best deck, like they're all 50-50, right? They're all kind of coin flips in their own way. You can win every match, but you can also lose every match, and that's kind of the mentality I've had with the deck. So I think it's good, but it is something that's not you're not like super good into the meta in the fact that you can lose against everything just as easy as you can win against everything too. Purple Luffy, I think, is kind of like in the same way with Shanks, but the difference is that like Shanks kind of has like this kind of more steady curve, right? I think Purple Luffy has a bit of a better way to high roll, and because of that, like even if something is negative, if you're able to high roll a lot or just get like your perfect curve, Purple Luffy is in a really strong spot. Like if you're able to play Luffy Taro on curve and then follow up with another one or like the 9-cost secret rare, there's just a lot of situations where it's a lot of pressure so quickly that decks aren't really able to interact with it quick enough because of that. So I think that's popular. We have Rob Lucci, which I think a lot of people, including myself, thought was going to be not so present in this meta because of Teach. But not only is it good in this meta because it has a good matchup against the top three, other at least top three, in the fact that Doflamingo, Shanks, and Purple Luffy are all winnable matchups based on the stats, but also the fact that you are like not even like that negative in the Teach, right? At a 45% Black and Yellow Luffy, which used to be like a 30%, is now like, you know, just a -1, -2. And then the rest of it is just really contendable too. So I think more people are going to bounce back into Lucci, realizing that it's not as much of a, it's not countered as much as they thought it was. And also, even if it, you know, Blackbeard is so present into this meta, it's something that you have ways to deck build around it if you are really scared about it. So this is the build here. Teach, again, like it is super popular, but man, the win rate of like 46.2%. And look at this abysmal loss rate against the Doflamingo, right? Like we have like a 30% chance to win against the deck. That's like every other table, right? Like it's crazy how bad this deck can do into this. It's okay otherwise, but even like the other two decks, like Shanks and Purple Luffy, both just also do just really well into the deck in general. So it's interesting to see just a tank immediately for us. We'll see if it gets any footing into this meta, but I do think it's something that is not going to be as present as I personally thought, and I think others did going on into it. We also have Red Purple Luffy. It's a deck that I again have a lot of fun with. I think like Shanks and Purple Luffy are in our favor. Lucci and Dofi are like 50-50s in a lot of ways. Our worst matchup is definitely Betty. Like 30% is definitely warranted. Bonnie 25% I disagree with, but it could just be different builds with it. And then Nami is a little bit tough. So like these, they have like a lot of like good and bad matchups, but we do have some good matchups into, you know, the top 5. So because of that, that can give you a bit of a foothold, I feel like. And you have like just a lot of like incidentals, like you have like BY is like a good matchup, Smoker is like a good matchup, which I think a lot of people are on that. Smoker also did like get a couple tops this weekend, even though it's not in this top 10, which I find is interesting. And then the rest of it, we've got like BY, which again is good into Dofi and Shanks, which is great, and then has always kind of lost the Purple Luffy. Rob Lucci's always has been like a positive matchup for it, but not as much as it used to be, because I think we are changing our builds to kind of address some more of the other meta. And then just kind of the matchups from there. Nami just, you know, and then I don't know, like we have like Nami and Bonnie, which we have like some really good matchups. But outside of like Nami losing to Dofi and Purple Luffy, I think it's going to make it very difficult for it to be present in this meta in general, because I feel like these two are going to be like close to 50% of the room for most events. And then we also have like Betty, sorry, which I know a lot of people are talking about it, and I understand why. Like, look at this matchup spread for this deck, right? It is green, except for probably the most important one, right? A 30% win rate against Doflamingo, which is again the most present deck I think that's going to be in this meta. So because you lose to the best deck in the meta so hard, it's going to be difficult for you to play it. But then if you just want to play your roulette, you're playing yellow, you want to roulette anyways, we have all of these like super good matches for us, right? Like Shanks, Purple Luffy is fantastic for us. Teach is fantastic for us. Red Purple, again, I hate this matchup. I just auto lose. BY, like all these great matchups. Like look at these like 60s, 50s, right? Like these are fantastic metas or matchups for the deck. But not being able to beat Dofi just holds you back so bad in a lot of ways. So if you're able to like change the way you build Betty to have even like a 40-60% matchup into Doflamingo, I think it can just be way higher on this list. It's just something that, again, it's just so held back by how oppressive the Dofi matchup is in general. But these are the matchup charts. You can check this out on yourself as well. And let's go to the example deck list. And to finish this one up, we're going to look at the top deck list for each one of these leaders in our power rankings. And also to just qualify what they mean by best, these are the highest win rate deck list on their ranked server with at least 50 games. And I'm going to have that data on the bottom left-hand corner of this video too, so you can check that out. So for example, this Doflamingo has 50 games and it had a 72% win rate. So I'll have that for the rest of these moving forward too. And I do think it's good information just so you guys know why these these decks are here and what their stats are really to kind of qualify them as well. But for Doflamingo, this deck is moderately self-explanatory. You will notice also, I did notice a good amount of text for each one of these decks that we're kind of going over. And for this one in particular, it's the copy of, or sorry, 3 copies of the Gum Gum Red Rock. This is a pretty hefty add for this deck, right? I think like we're taking out Jozus to be able to facilitate that, which I think Jozus have been very strong for this deck in general. But to have 3 copies of it as well as 3 copies of the Raging Tiger, I think was really interesting for this build. Just means that you are kind of playing a little bit more into the later game in the sense that you want to be able to get these removals. If you're playing against something, you know, if you're playing against Shanks and you play 10-drop Shanks, being able to get rid of Red Rock means that you're able to not only not lose next turn potentially, but also it means that you're able to then attack more on this next turn. So I think that's a really interesting shift. It's something that I have to test out personally, but I do think that's a notable difference for this Doflamingo deck compared to a lot of others that I've seen in the last couple weeks. So there it is there. Next up, we've got Rob Lucci, and this one, I almost want to make it a game where you guys figure out like what's the most interesting ad for it. And for me, it's the Tashigi. And I know a lot of you guys are already saying like, why is this here? Why is this a card that exists in this deck? And because you're not a smoker leader, right? Because it has the on play, if your leader is smoker, give up to one of your opponent's characters -4 cost during this turn, right? But it also does have the activate main of once per turn. If this is the turn this character is played, place up to one of your opponent's cost 0 characters into its owner's trash. So it's honestly just like a really interesting tempo card for this deck, and it's something that I've been theorizing for this personally, just the fact that it has an activate main, but also the fact it doesn't KO and everything like it. You don't really care the fact that it has to be 0 cost because we are playing cards like Ice Age or Tempest Kick. Our leader on attack gives us the -1 cost anyways. So like there's some weird situations where if you just want to play a card on tempo, which I think having a 5-drop 6k out for Rob Lucci is great already. Having a 4-drop 6k with our Rob Lucci already can kind of help us with a lot of games. It just means like if you're playing against even like Doflamingo, you attack with leader, you play your Tashigi on curve. It's a card they can't really remove, but then also you can get rid of like their 1-drop Buggy or another 1-drop that they'd want to be able to bounce back into their hand with their Law or Jozus effects too. So because of that, I think it's a really interesting ad that helps out the deck in those kind of matchups. And again, like if you want to get rid of a 5 cost or even a 6 cost, you can just use Ice Age Rob Lucci effect, and then you can get rid of whatever, right? You also get rid of like Sabos, which comes up in some matchups, and you also get rid of like the I don't know, there's just like a lot of good removal you get from this card that I think is unique, that people will not be playing against this from you, and you do get that kind of additional ad. So I think that's something that's a cool different ad for this deck that I honestly I need to test out myself, and maybe I will in the future too. But honestly, other than that, I think Lucci is great. It's been cool to see it adapt to this ever-changing meta for S2, and in a meta where people are like not confident immediately if this was going to be relevant, being able to shift into it, I think is really interesting. So this is the build for the Rob Lucci. All right, and then next up we've got Shanks. This is obviously one of the better decks in this meta, and the fact that it did win the Booster Box Treasure Cup last weekend, and something that I think people have a little bit more eyes on it currently as well. This one is pretty different from the first place list though. There's not like a super big different tech comparatively, except for the fact that we are playing like 4 copies of Dragon, as well as 4 copies of Silvers, as well as the double Shanks and the Goldie Rogers. So this one's I don't think is as spicy as other builds, but it is something that I think that Shanks is pretty open-ended with some of their ratios and some of their tech choices too. We really don't want to lose to removal though, since we do have 4 copies of Ace as well as 3 copies of the 5-drop Marco. We're playing a good amount of events too with Bad Maddox Kick Course, Guard Point, as well as Red Rock, and it's an interesting build for this deck in general, I think. So I think that Shanks is really good. It's going to be something that's going to be very present in the meta. I don't think it's ever going to be the best deck in the meta, but I do think it's going to be the best deck of the day during this meta, if that makes sense for that difference between the two of them. But this is Shanks, and I do think it's very good right now as well. Next up, we've got Purple Luffy, and this is definitely a deck you'll see like based on the games, right? This is a very fast deck, which means that you can play a lot of games in a short amount of time. I do think it's something that is probably skewed better on a ladder experience than necessarily on a like a tournament experience, right? The reason I make the difference between the two of those is that this can get like a net positive wins over time faster than like a slower deck can, if that makes sense. So that's something I think that can skew it a little bit, but we have 137 games with a 62% win rate, which is really good for a card game like this. and some new changes that I've been seeing. One, I think this has been more popular for the deck in general. Just having another 4/6 Straw Hat, even if it's just a vanilla Usopp, that's just very good for the deck in general. We do have our 9 drops in the Linlin as well as the 9-drop Monkey D. Luffy. I think 2 of this card is just the best copies of for anything that can run it. It's good on curve, but like sometimes it doesn't do a lot. It is a 9-drop 10k with rush, but I do think it's just like something like just being able to have something you can find late game with like your Trafalgar Law can be really helpful for us. Well, we also have like the Luffy Taro as well as the Sanji. I think both of these are just great in that kind of spot as well. So no copies of 10-drop. We're playing a good of just like our Straw Hats, right? We are playing the Hitokiri, which lets us, if you know, we're playing it on 4, and we're playing against a deck that just plays a bunch of 2-drops. We can use the effect once per turn. Pretty easy if they don't answer it. And then another kind of tech option I've been seeing, it's just a couple copies of this 2-drop Nico Robin blocker. Sometimes we just need another blocker that costs 2, which just helps us with our curve a lot of the time, or also being able to say, you know what, for 10, I want to be able to play like a Sanji. I want to play a Luffy Taro. I want to play the Nico Robin afterwards, and then still have one open for Gum Gum Giant. I think that's something that's just like really good usage of our 10 Dawn, and just good awareness for it too. But I think this deck is going to be very popular. It's something that sometimes you will just lose outright because you're not finding your pieces still, even though we have so many more consistency pieces. But I think it's the strongest it's ever been, and Purple Luffy's in a really good spot. So there's the build there. And then for Red Purple Luffy, again, as someone who's been playing a lot of this one, this is a really interesting build of it in general. So 59 games with this one, 54% win rate, and it's more aggressive than I've been seeing this deck in the long term, right? We're just like, what if we saw Purple Luffy and we just put a couple red cards into it, right? And the fact that we are playing with the Luffy Taro still, the fact that we're playing like the Yasop to be able to be a 7k leader sometimes, right? The fact that we have 4 copies of Monkey D. Dragon and it's the highest costed card in this deck is, I also, just very strong for us. I don't feel like we're taking advantage of our leader effect as much as like other builds for it either. The fact that we don't have like a lot of Dawn minusing outside of just like the 2 copies of Queen that we have, but the fact that we are like a 6k that lets us be like this very aggressive version of it, I think is strong in its own way. So I haven't tried this one as much. I think it's something that is interesting for a concept for this deck. I think Purple Luffy does what this style is doing a little bit better, but I do think it's interesting to just see what people are trying with Red Purple. It's such like a open-ended deck, I think, in a lot of ways, so it's cool to see this build as well. All right, moving into the bottom 5, we got Monkey D. Luffy here, and it's something that I think I've struggled with kind of conceptualizing it into this meta, and the fact that it's something that was so good in OP08, so good in OP07, right? I would contend in both those formats, at least at the end of OP07, it was likely the best deck in the format. Most likely the best deck in the OP08 format, right? And so it still has to be pretty present in this format too, even with Teach and other things kind of running around. And it is cool to see the kind of adjustments that it's made because of that too. So biggest one I've been seeing is Raigo, the fact that this is helpful for getting rid of a big target, but sometimes it does help you get down to 1 life, which is important in some situations, which I think is cool. But then also for this one, like people have been trying a bunch of different like 3 and 4 drop blockers. I've been seeing like the 3-drop Star Deck Nami. I've been seeing the 4-drop Rebecca sneaking its way into this. And so we also have the Shirahoshi from Star Deck 8. So this is a blocker, but also the fact that it gives something -4 cost means that you can kind of do some interesting plays where you can use it with like a Monkey D. Luffy to get rid of a 9 cost, right? So -4 plus the Luffy lets you get rid of a 9 cost, right? So sometimes that becomes present, right? I think that's strong for you. Sometimes you can just play it for 4 if you got nothing better to do, and I do think that's an interesting tech for the deck. But per usual, I think no one's playing the Ace package for this anymore. There's just so much kind of tech options that you have to afford yourself to put into your deck that being able to play the Ace is just not generally worth it in its way. But here's the yellow and black Luffy. I think it's something that's going to continue to be around. It's something that people are going to have to like super hardcore grind with, know all of their matches really well, and know what they're outs for. But the fact that like this Sabo is just super answerable in most decks right now makes it very tricky for you to do the same thing you've been doing, I think, for the last couple metas too. But here's the BY Luffy list as well. And then we have Nami here, and Nami is definitely in an interesting spot. Kind of again, like looking at the power rank, the matchup charts. The fact that we lose so hard to Dofi and to Purple Luffy, I think is going to make it pretty difficult for it to get any footing specifically into this meta. But it is something that did get a good amount of support with the 1-drop Nami. This card, if your opponent doesn't answer it, is just obnoxious. It usually eats up like a leader attack. The fact that it draws us a card, the cards that it lets you draw are the best cards in your deck, which are your blue events, which is really good. I think that's something that's really solid for it as well. So other kind of differences, adding a couple copies of Boodle is interesting. The one Usopp, which I think some people, I have to respect this at times, and it's just an interesting build in general. So I think Nami's going to be around, but again, like the fact that Dofi and Purple Luffy, I think it's going to keep it down a little bit, but we'll see how it kind of changes in the next couple of weeks as well. And then next up, we've got the Teach, which again, like we can do well with this deck, right? This deck is not like out of luck for this meta. I think some people saw it's, the first week, right? Like, oh, this deck is so good. How could it be bad? Like it's going to warp the game. And now it's been like, oh, this deck can't top 32. It's trash. No one's going to be playing it. I think the truth is somewhere closer in the middle with it. So it is a deck that is really known in the sense of like what it can do, its extensions, and usually what its deck lists look like. The deck lists for this one are like usually like 40, if not more cards the same compared to anything else, just because you're so reliant on your Blackbeard package that you get from the set in general. But some techs I've been seeing, and I mean, like Laboon, we don't have to talk about that one, but also like Jack has been kind of creeping up at like 1 or 2 copies. The fact that this does get you cycle, the fact that it gets removal is really good too. If you were able to play like a Von Augur on the previous turn, you then could play Jack on the next one, and that can get you some good value as well. And then we do just have like a good amount of events. I do like the Tempest Kick in the deck. I do think it's something that lets you get some removal nicely. So I do think that's a cool, different tech for it. And we fill up our trash so quickly, right? It's so easy for us to do that the fact that we get like this draw one and more cycle, I think is helpful for the deck too. And then, obviously we end on this guy, right? We got to play 4 copies of this guy, right? Yeah, definitely. But I don't know. I don't have a lot to say about this guy. It's going to be interesting to see if it's able to find a foothold, but it seemed kind of shaky compared to where it's been doing the last couple weeks. So there it is there. And then next up, we've got Betty. This deck is kind of like the bane of my own personal existence. I'm not like super into aggro, and honestly, sometimes this deck just wins like outright. It is so strong. If you're able to get like double Karasu out, most decks can't do anything about it, which is pretty absurd. You do kind of fold to aggression to removal, specifically if you're 4 drops. I think Doflamingo is still just a better version of it, and which is why like you have such a bad matchup into it because of it can get removal and build the board wider, and it's a 4 life aggro deck versus a 5 life value aggro deck too. So I think that's something that's impactful. We do get a lot of good cards though, a lot of new support, right? We have a new 2K that we can play off of life. We have another card so we can play off life that's a 3-drop blocker, and then also we do have like the new Koala that we get out of OP09. So this is a blocker. Being able to play a Revolution Army and get some card cycle is good too, as well as the Sabo, which this is a OP09 card. 2 place 1 Revolution Army card from your hand to the top of your life face up. If you have 2 or more life, put the top or bottom into your hand. So you're able to like stack your life, make it so that you can know what card you're going to trigger. You do kind of have to convince your opponent to attack into your life, but having like a 7-drop 7K, and then I don't see everyone playing dragon. Some people don't play this card in their builds, and it's so good. It's so good for this deck, right? Even if it's like a little bit later in the game, you do get that help. And we're even playing like the Revolution Army General Headquarters, which I honestly don't think this is a terrible like additional stage for this deck. The fact that we can discard it off our leader effect because it just has to have the Revolution Army type, which this does, is very strong. And because of all that, I think this is an interesting version of this build that has like a little bit more like, it's not as like low to the ground aggressive, but the fact that you have like a little bit more consistency and a little bit more top end for the late game, I think helps out the deck quite a bit too. So this is the Betty build as well. And then wrap it up, we do have Bonnie here, and I think Bonnie's in a really good spot, honestly. It's something that you can do well against Doflamingo, and also like Purple Luffy, you have like a lot of great tools for the deck. Like I know that every time I've talked about Bonnie, I've had to talk about how good Carrot has been for green in general, and the fact that this can like rest down a Luffy Taro is so good for this deck. It's really great for making it so Purple Luffy can't be as aggressive as they want to be. It makes it so like decks like Doflamingo can't be as aggressive they want to be. It just buys you so much time that it's a shame that in current builds, like people aren't able to search it outright. They just have to kind of hard draw it. Also, for this build specifically, we're only playing the Bonnie searcher. We're not doing the Bonnie Doflamingo searchers, which I do think was helpful for our second place list for booster box as well. but like it is kind of difficult to find space for double searchers while still being as consistent, especially since like all of our top end is more on like the I don't know. I think Kid is like a little bit more strong. We're only playing 3 copies of Doflamingo, which is great. I do think like this card's fantastic too. Like this Shanks is so good for the deck, being able to get like some hard removal, and the fact that we have this 11k that stays on the board against most matchups is really good. And the only other thing is that I don't super agree with Uruj all the time. I do think most decks can kind of interact with it, and it's not really worth spending your 4 Dawn turn. You'd rather like do like double searches or like just get you set up with a couple more cards. I do like the Bart. I think I like a little bit more than the Uruj, but I'll digress on that one. But with all that aside, I do think that Bonnie's in a really good spot. I think people need to kind of respect that it's going to be around for a bit, and it's going to be interesting to see how it does in this format in general. So that's going to be it for this one, though. I wanted this to be a little bit shorter, but here we are at like 20 or so minutes. But again, I could talk about this meta quite a bit. It's been really fun. It's been really interesting to see just how many decks are viable and what people are doing and brewing up in the first place. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you again to TCG Matchmaking. Make sure to check out their Patreon. That's going to be it for me, and thank you guys so much for watching.